What if I told you that most of your thoughts, decisions, and behaviors aren't really under your control? What if the person you think you are is just a thin veneer covering darker, more primitive forces that actually run your life? This isn't science fiction or mystical thinking. It's the revolutionary insight that Sigmund Freud brought to the world over a century ago when he peeled back the layers of human consciousness and revealed what he called the unconscious mind. But Freud didn't just discover a hidden part of our psyche. He uncovered its shadow, the dark repository of desires, fears, and impulses that we spend our lives trying to deny, suppress, and escape. Today, we're going to journey into the darkest corners of human psychology as revealed by the father of psychoanalysis. We'll explore how Freud discovered that beneath our rational, civilized exterior lurks a primitive, irrational force that shapes everything we do. From the sexual and aggressive impulses of the ID to the defense mechanisms that keep us from facing uncomfortable truths about ourselves, Freud's theories expose the uncomfortable reality that we are not the masters of our own minds. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Freud believed that civilization itself is built on repression, why our dreams reveal our darkest secrets, and how the unconscious mind continues to influence modern psychology and culture in ways you never imagined. Prepare to meet the stranger living inside your own head. To understand Freud's revolutionary insight, we need to go back to Vienna in the late 1800s, a time when people believed that humans were fundamentally rational beings guided by logic, morality, and conscious decision-making. The prevailing view was that if someone behaved badly or strangely, it was due to a lack of willpower, poor character, or insufficient moral education. But Freud, working as a neurologist treating patients with mysterious symptoms that had no physical cause, began to suspect something far more disturbing. He encountered people who couldn't remember traumatic events, women who developed paralysis with no medical explanation, and patients whose symptoms seemed to follow psychological rather than anatomical patterns. Through techniques like hypnosis and free association, Freud discovered that these patients harbored memories, desires, and conflicts that they weren't consciously aware of, but which were powerful enough to manifest as physical symptoms. This led him to a shocking conclusion. Most of human mental life occurs outside of conscious awareness, in a dark realm he called the unconscious. But Freud's unconscious wasn't just a storage space for forgotten memories. It was a seething cauldron of primitive desires, forbidden impulses, and unacceptable thoughts that he believed drove human behavior from the shadows. According to Freud, we aren't rational beings who occasionally act irrationally. We're irrational beings who have learned to appear rational through massive psychological effort. This was perhaps the most devastating blow to human narcissism in intellectual history. Freud didn't just suggest that we sometimes act unconsciously. He argued that consciousness itself might be the exception rather than the rule in human mental life. The centerpiece of Freud's dark vision of human nature was his structural model of the psyche, which divided the mind into three competing forces: the id, ego, and superego. But it was the id that revealed the true shadow of human nature. The id, according to Freud, is the oldest and most primitive part of our psyche. It's present from birth and operates entirely in the unconscious, driven by what he called the pleasure principle, the relentless demand for immediate gratification of basic desires. The ID doesn't understand logic, morality, or consequences. It simply wants what it wants, when it wants it, regardless of reality or social constraints. But here's where Freud's vision becomes truly dark. He believed the IDD is fundamentally driven by two primary instincts that civilized society finds unacceptable. The first is eros, the life instinct, which includes not just survival drives but sexual desires in their most primitive form. The second is thanatos, the death instinct, which encompasses aggressive and destructive impulses. According to Freud, buried in every human unconscious are desires for sexual gratification without moral constraint and aggressive impulses toward dominance, violence, and even destruction. These aren't aberrations or signs of mental illness. They're the basic building blocks of human nature that we all share but rarely acknowledge. The ID doesn't care about your moral values, your relationships, or social consequences. It wants immediate pleasure and the elimination of anything that stands in its way. If left unchecked, Freud believed the deity would drive us to rape, murder, and chaos. Every person, no matter how civilized they appear, carries this primitive force within them. This is why Freud saw civilization itself as fundamentally built on repression. Society could only function if people learned to suppress and redirect these unconscious desires into socially acceptable forms. But this repression comes at an enormous psychological cost, creating what Freud called the fundamental tension between individual desire and social necessity. The ego, according to Freud, develops as a mediator between the id's demands and reality's constraints. Unlike the id, which operates on the pleasure principle, the ego operates on the reality principle. It tries to satisfy the id's desires in ways that won't lead to destruction or punishment. But the ego isn't a noble force of reason triumphing over base instinct. It's more like a desperate diplomat trying to negotiate between a psychotic dictator, the id, and an impossibly strict moral authority, the superego, while navigating the dangerous terrain of external reality. The ego employs what Freud called defense mechanisms, unconscious psychological strategies designed to protect us from anxiety, guilt, and unacceptable thoughts. But these defense mechanisms often involve self-deception, distortion of reality, and the redirection of uncomfortable truths. Repression, the most fundamental defense mechanism, involves burying unacceptable desires and memories so deeply in the unconscious that we genuinely forget they exist. But Freud discovered that repressed material doesn't disappear. It continues to influence our behavior in disguised forms. Projection involves attributing our own unacceptable impulses to others. Instead of acknowledging our own aggressive or sexual desires, we see them in other people and condemn them there. This allows us to express these impulses indirectly while maintaining our moral self-image. Sublimation, which Freud considered the most mature defense mechanism, involves channeling unacceptable impulses into socially acceptable activities. According to Freud, much of human achievement in art, science, and culture represents sublimated sexual and aggressive energy, redirected into creative pursuits. But even these seemingly positive defense mechanisms reveal the dark truth about human psychology. We can only function in society by lying to ourselves about our true nature and constantly working to hide our most fundamental desires from conscious awareness. Perhaps nowhere did Freud reveal the shadow of the unconscious more clearly than in his analysis of dreams, which he called the royal road to the unconscious. According to Freud, dreams provide a window into the id's desires, showing us what our unconscious mind really wants when the ego's defenses are lowered during sleep. But Freud's dream analysis wasn't about inspiring symbolism or spiritual insight. He believed that most dreams at their core represent wish fulfillment of sexual and aggressive desires that we can't acknowledge while awake. The bizarre symbolic nature of dreams occurs because even in sleep, these desires are so unacceptable that they must be disguised through what he called dream work. Freud argued that dream symbols often represent sexual content in disguised form. Objects that penetrate or enclose, activities that involve rhythm or friction, and scenarios involving authority figures often mask sexual fantasies that the dreamer couldn't consciously tolerate. Similarly, dreams of violence, revenge, or harm often represent the expression of aggressive impulses that civilized consciousness refuses to acknowledge. According to Freud, we regularly dream about hurting people we love, dominating those who have power over us, and destroying obstacles to our desires. This means that every night, according to Freudian theory, we experience a temporary return to our most primitive psychological state, where the id's desires play out in symbolic form without the ego's reality testing or the superego's moral constraints. Even more disturbing, Freud believed that we often have unconscious sexual and aggressive feelings toward family members, including what he famously called the Oedipus complex, unconscious sexual attraction to the opposite-sex parent, and murderous rivalry with the same-sex parent during childhood development. While many of Freud's specific theories about dream symbolism have been challenged by modern research, his fundamental insight that dreams reveal aspects of ourselves that we prefer not to acknowledge continues to influence our understanding of unconscious mental processes. Freud's exploration of sexuality revealed perhaps the darkest aspects of his understanding of human nature. He didn't just argue that sexual desire was more important than Victorian society wanted to admit. He claimed that sexuality was far more primitive, perverse, and central to human psychology than anyone had imagined. According to Freud, human sexuality doesn't begin in adolescence with romantic attraction. It begins in infancy with what he called polymorphous perversity, a primitive sexual energy that can attach to any object, activity, or person that provides pleasure. Children, he argued, are naturally sexual beings whose desires must be carefully shaped and channeled by civilization. Freud's theory of psychosexual development suggested that early childhood experiences around feeding, toilet training, and physical affection create unconscious sexual fixations that influence adult personality and behavior. Problems during these early stages, he believed, could lead to unconscious sexual obsessions that manifest in apparently non-sexual behaviors. Even more controversially, Freud argued that what society considers sexual perversion, fetishes, unusual attractions, and non-reproductive sexual behaviors, represent the natural state of human sexuality before it's shaped by social constraints. Normal heterosexual attraction, according to Freud, is actually an artificial construction that requires significant psychological work to achieve and maintain. This led to his shocking claim that everyone carries within them the potential for every form of sexual behavior that society considers deviant or unacceptable. The difference between normal and perverted sexuality isn't the presence or absence of certain desires, but the degree to which these desires have been successfully repressed and redirected. Freud also believed that much of what appears to be non-sexual behavior actually represents sublimated or displaced sexual energy. Ambition, creativity, religious devotion, and even friendship could all be traced back to unconscious sexual motivations that had been transformed through psychological defense mechanisms. While Freud's theories about sexuality have been extensively critiqued and revised by modern psychology, his fundamental insight that sexual desire is more complex, primitive, and influential than conscious awareness recognizes continues to influence our understanding of human motivation and behavior. The implications of Freud's theories extend far beyond individual psychology to his understanding of civilization itself. According to Freud, human society exists in a state of fundamental tension between individual desires and collective necessity. Civilization requires the mass repression of natural human impulses, creating what he saw as an inherent source of psychological suffering. In his work, Civilization and Its Discontents, Freud argued that the price of living in society is the constant suppression of our most basic drives. We must repress sexual desires that would lead to chaos if freely expressed. We must control aggressive impulses that would destroy social cooperation. We must submit to authorities and follow rules that often conflict with our immediate desires. This repression, according to Freud, is necessary for civilization to function, but it creates enormous psychological costs. Neurosis, anxiety, depression, and various forms of mental illness result from the constant effort required to suppress unconscious desires and maintain socially acceptable behavior. Freud believed that this tension was irreconcilable. We can't have both complete individual freedom and functional society. The more civilized we become, the more we must repress our natural impulses, leading to increased psychological suffering. But without this repression, society would collapse into chaos driven by uncontrolled sexual and aggressive desires. This creates what Freud saw as the fundamental tragedy of human existence. We can't be happy in civilization, but we can't survive without it. We're trapped between our primitive nature and social necessity, forever struggling to balance conflicting demands that can never be fully reconciled. While many of Freud's specific theories have been challenged, revised, or abandoned by modern psychology, his fundamental insights about the unconscious mind continue to influence how we understand human behavior. Contemporary research has confirmed that much of mental processing occurs outside conscious awareness, and that unconscious factors significantly influence decision-making, emotional responses, and behavior. Modern cognitive psychology has identified numerous unconscious biases, automatic mental processes, and implicit memories that shape our perceptions and actions without our awareness. While these discoveries don't necessarily support Freud's specific theories about sexual and aggressive drives, they confirm his basic insight that consciousness represents only a small portion of mental activity. Neuroscience has also revealed the extent to which emotional and motivational systems in the brain operate independently of conscious rational thought. The limbic system, which governs emotions and basic drives, often influences behavior before conscious awareness has time to evaluate and respond to situations. In popular culture, Freudian concepts continue to shape how we think about human motivation, relationships, and mental health. Terms like Freudian slip, defense mechanism, repression, and unconscious desire have become part of everyday language, reflecting the enduring influence of his ideas about the hidden aspects of human psychology. Therapeutic approaches influenced by Freudian theory continue to explore how unconscious conflicts, early childhood experiences, and defense mechanisms contribute to psychological problems. While modern psychotherapy has moved beyond strict Freudian orthodoxy, the basic principle that psychological symptoms often represent the expression of unconscious conflicts remains influential. Freud's exploration of the unconscious mind revealed uncomfortable truths about human nature that continue to challenge our understanding of ourselves. His vision of the psyche as a battleground between primitive desires and civilized constraints offers a dark but compelling explanation for much of human behavior that seems irrational or self-destructive. Whether or not you accept Freud's specific theories about sexuality, aggression, and unconscious motivation, his fundamental insight remains powerful. We are not the rational, self-aware beings we imagine ourselves to be. Much of what drives us operates in the shadows of consciousness, influenced by forces we rarely acknowledge and impulses we prefer not to examine. Understanding Freud's shadow psychology doesn't mean accepting that we're prisoners of unconscious desires, or that civilization is doomed to create suffering. But it does mean recognizing that self-knowledge requires looking beyond the comfortable stories we tell ourselves about our motivations and confronting the darker aspects of human nature that we all share. The unconscious mind that Freud discovered isn't evil or inherently destructive. It's simply more primitive, emotional, and complex than conscious awareness typically recognizes. By understanding these hidden aspects of ourselves, we can make more informed choices about how to channel our deeper impulses in constructive rather than destructive directions. Freud's legacy reminds us that the journey towards self-understanding requires courage to face uncomfortable truths about our nature, and the wisdom to recognize that being human means navigating the eternal tension between our deepest desires and our highest aspirations. What aspects of your own behavior do you think might be influenced by unconscious factors you're not aware of? How do you balance your immediate desires with social obligations and moral constraints? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this exploration of Freud's dark psychology changed how you think about human nature and consciousness, subscribe for more insights into the hidden forces that shape our minds and behavior.